Hello everybody and welcome to a new video here on my channel where I'm going to give my full predictions for next year's driver lineups in Formula 1 a full year in advance. Obviously doing this so early probably means that a lot of the opinions that I currently hold and share are going to change very drastically before next year, but I just want this to be sort of a fun, light-hearted theoretical discussion, more so than a serious debate where I'm putting stakes on the line. So what I'm going to do, running in last year's Constructors' Championship order, I'm going to go through all the teams that I don't think will change driver lineups, and then all the teams that I do think will change driver lineups. Starting us off for the teams that I don't think will change lineups are actually the teams that finished 2nd, 3rd and 4th in last year's standings, being Red Bull, McLaren, and the newly rebranded Aston Martin. For Red Bull, we've heard Christian Horner talk for years about needing both cars to try and compete with Mercedes, and I think signing Sergio Perez gives them the best chance to do so since Daniel Ricciardo left the team. That said, there is a reason that the second driver spot next to Max Verstappen has been such a struggle for Red Bull, and my eyebrows are slightly raised by the fact that Perez only decided to sign a one-year deal with the team. If things were to go pear-shaped for Perez at Red Bull and he decided to leave the team at the end of the year for any reason, I think he would certainly draw immediate interest from around the sport. He was linked with the likes of Alfa Romeo, Haas and Williams at varying points last year, and I expect all of those teams would once again reignite their interest in him. However, for the sake of this video, I'm going to say that Perez at Red Bull works out, although I don't think they will truly challenge Mercedes, as Horner probably hopes they will. I do think they will be able to challenge Mercedes much more regularly and much more aggressively than last year when Alex Albon was with the team. Then next I have McLaren sticking with Ricciardo and Lando Norris. I think Ricciardo was a slam dunk signing for McLaren. I do believe that he's an upgrade over Carlos Sainz, who left to Ferrari. We'll talk about that later. And I'm very excited to see how McLaren's performance is affected by their new Mercedes power unit. As I said, I do think Ricciardo is an upgrade over Perez, and that does make me question how the team dynamic might change if Norris is regularly outperformed on race weekends, but I suppose that is a bridge that will be crossed later down the line, and I do expect both Ricciardo and Norris to be at the team in 2022 and beyond. Third up for teams that I expect to keep the same driver lineup is Aston Martin. I think you could very easily argue that Lance Stroll has possibly the safest seat in F1, and while I do have small doubts over whether or not Sebastian Vettel will be able to rebound from his really poor performance at Ferrari last year, I think the exposure that he brings to the brand means that he will certainly be on the team in 2022 and beyond. Fourth up, I have Ferrari. I believe they will stick with their new signing Sainz and their new number one driver Charles Leclerc for next year. While the power of the engine and the performance of the car is out of the driver's hands, I do expect Leclerc and Sainz to have a better working dynamic than Leclerc and Vettel did a year ago when it seemed quite frosty at different points. Then for my fifth team that I expect to retain the same driver lineup for next year is AlphaTauri Honda, who I believe will stick with Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda. Gasly has been a total revelation since returning to AlphaTauri in 2019, highlighted by his really emotional victory at Monza last year. Tsunoda, on the other hand, impressed me greatly during Formula 2 last season, and I am very excited to see his transition to Formula 1. Perhaps if Perez at Red Bull doesn't work out, as I talked about earlier, Gasly could be re-promoted to Red Bull, but that is not a scenario that I would consider likely. Then my sixth and final team that I expect to keep the same driver lineup for next year is Haas. Getting Mick Schumacher, in my opinion, was a real coup for Haas, and I was surprised that Alfa Romeo didn't get their hands on him first. Nikita Mazepin has seemed to bring a lot of negative publicity to Haas and the sport of F1 as a whole before he's even made his F1 debut, but obviously I believe the main factor in him getting the seat at Haas was the large sponsorship that he brings through the form of his billionaire father. So that leaves four teams that I expect to change lineups for next year: Mercedes, Alpine, Alfa Romeo, and Williams. We'll start with last year's champions and the team that I expect to be this year's champions as well, Mercedes. I was a little surprised to only see Lewis Hamilton sign a one-year extension with the German team. I thought perhaps he would sign a 3-year extension to align himself with Toto Wolff's contract and then retire from the sport at the end of 2023. If I were a betting man, I would say there are 3 scenarios which are most likely for Mercedes. In no particular order: number 1, Hamilton retires, George Russell is promoted from Williams and he drives alongside Valtteri Bottas. Number 2, Hamilton resigns but Bottas leaves to be the number 1 driver elsewhere and Russell is promoted from Williams to drive alongside Hamilton. Number 3, Hamilton and Bottas both resign to drive with Mercedes in 2022. I would argue that the third option would be the most desirable for Mercedes, as Bottas and Hamilton have proven to be an effective partnership with far less issues than Hamilton and Nico Rosberg's prior relationship. However, for this predictions video, I'm going with something a little bit wild, a little bit crazy, and I'm not going with any of those scenarios. My prediction is that Hamilton will re-sign to continue racing in F1, but his new teammate will be Esteban Ocon, joining from Alpine. Now, I think this prediction probably needs the most justification, and this will be the longest part of the video explaining my prediction. I really wouldn't even argue that this is the most likely lineup for Mercedes next year. I think the 3 scenarios that I mentioned before, all of which involving some combination of Hamilton, Bottas and Russell, are probably more likely. But I think the possibility of Hamilton and Ocon is very, very fascinating. Ocon is a former member of Mercedes Junior Driver Academy, and while he formally left the academy to sign with Alpine 2 years ago, he is still represented by Wolff. This is such a unique and interesting dynamic to me. Could you imagine if Paul Pogba played for Manchester United while being represented by Manchester City's director of transfers? Or alternatively, if LeBron James played for the Los Angeles Lakers while being represented by the Los Angeles Clippers general manager. In this scenario, I have Bottas leaving Mercedes to be someone else's number 1 driver, given the regulation changes that are set to come into effect next year. I will get into that a little bit more later. But perhaps the more controversial aspect of this is, why wouldn't Mercedes just promote Russell? In my opinion, promoting Russell to be Hamilton's teammate in the event of Bottas departing is an unnecessary risk for Mercedes. While Russell was extremely impressive when he filled in for Hamilton last year in Bahrain and looked equal if not better than Bottas in the same car, putting Russell head to head every weekend against perhaps the greatest driver ever is a totally different beast. Hamilton has talked so openly about retirement, and I don't really see him staying in the sport for longer than 2 or 3 more years. So with that in mind, if you were Wolff, would you promote Russell and put him against Hamilton, or would you perhaps try to broker a deal with a more mid-table team to give Russell more experience before elevating him to Mercedes to be Hamilton's successor after he retires? Another aspect to consider in all of this is that I believe Mercedes will want to be positioned to make a run for Verstappen when his contract expires at the end of 2023. So, let's say Hamilton re-signs for 2 more years and then retires at the end of 2023, also leaving the team with Wolff, who ventures on to other things, and Mercedes are positioned to make an aggressive run to steal Verstappen from Red Bull. If Verstappen opts to re-sign with Red Bull, Russell can easily be promoted to be Mercedes' number 1 driver, or perhaps Mercedes could even sign Verstappen and promote Russell to replace Ocon to create a dream driver lineup. I just believe that signing Ocon as Hamilton's teammate gives Mercedes more long-term flexibility to pursue Verstappen at the end of 2023 and Leclerc at the end of 2024. Ocon is more experienced than Russell and has experience, crucially, as a number 2 driver. I don't think Mercedes want to sign anyone who could potentially disrupt the environment that Hamilton and Bottas have created, with Bottas not being a serious challenger to Hamilton's throne. So that moves me on to the next team, which I expect to change driver lineups, being Alpine, and I have Russell joining Alpine from Williams to replace Ocon, who is going to Mercedes. While I don't doubt that Russell has the talent to drive for Mercedes next year alongside Hamilton, I think promoting him to a mid-table team for another year or 2 is less of a risk. And even though he won't be driving against Hamilton, I have no doubt that driving against Fernando Alonso every weekend at Alpine would be a very, very tough challenge. I will confess, this is an idea and domino effect that I thought up before Alpine's change in management. So maybe this could have been slightly more viable before the shock departure of Cyril Abiteboul 2 months ago, given that he brokered a deal with Wolff to bring Ocon to Alpine in the first place. But as I said before, I only want this to be a fun, light-hearted discussion, and this is something that I know isn't likely, but I just think is an interesting possibility. Then the third team I have changing driver lineup is Alfa Romeo. I expect Kimi Raikkonen to retire at the end of this year, and I have Ferrari Academy driver Robert Schwartzman graduating from Formula 2 to take his place. I would love to see Callum Ilott also get a chance at Alfa Romeo, perhaps replacing Antonio Giovinazzi, but I think Alfa Romeo trotting out a lineup of 2 rookies given the impending regulations changes might be too much of a risk. Therefore, I have Giovinazzi retaining his seat alongside Schwartzman. Last but certainly not least, I have Williams, who I predict to bring back Bottas as their new number 1 driver, and alongside him will be Dan Ticktum from the Williams Driver Academy and graduating from Formula 2. I think Williams' new ownership, Dorilton Capital, I hope I pronounced that correctly, will be looking to make an aggressive splash in the driver market. And in this scenario, where Russell is promoted to a more competitive team, I think bringing back Bottas would be the perfect solution for them. This is also made much more possible by the impending regulation changes. Of course, if there were no regulation changes, it would make no sense for Bottas to leave the best team on the grid for one of the worst. Alongside Bottas, I have Ticktum. While much can be made of his previous behavioural issues, I do believe that his switch to Carlin in F2 makes him a serious title contender, and I think he offers more long-term upside than retaining Nicholas Latifi or promoting Roy Nissany. So, just to recap through my full list of predictions, I have Ocon and Hamilton at Mercedes, Verstappen and Perez at Red Bull, Ricciardo and Norris at McLaren, Stroll and Vettel at Aston Martin, Alonso and Russell at Alpine, Sainz and Leclerc at Ferrari, Gasly and Tsunoda at AlphaTauri, Giovinazzi and Schwartzman at Alfa Romeo, Schumacher and Mazepin at Haas, Ticktum and Bottas at Williams. All in all, I have 5 changes from this year's grid, which is maybe not as high as you'd expect for a big prediction video like this, but I think given the impending regulation changes, a lot of teams are going to be hesitant to make any drastic moves. I have Raikkonen retiring from the sport, Latifi losing his seat, as well as Ticktum and Schwartzman graduating from F2. Please leave a comment telling me which predictions you agree with, which predictions you disagree with, and whatever predictions you may have for next year's driver lineups. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.